matches.
Well, at the end of the 18th century, two brilliant young men, Montgolfier brothers, noticed in their father's paper factory that a workman's shirt, he'd got too close to the fire, billowed out, just like this. And in one of those flashes, they thought that might be the way for mankind to finally leave the surface of the planet. North Pole's that way. It works. Now, the hero for this journey is a man that very few people have even heard of, Andrée. He was Swedish, and he's my hero because he thought he could cross the North Pole in a hot air balloon. So let's go and find out about it.
I was born in the wrong century. That's what my friends tell me, and I'm afraid they're right. I should have lived in the 19th century, when most of the world still had to be discovered. I should have been one of those brave men who left the safety and warmth of their homes to explore the blank areas on the globe, those places where no white man had ever set foot. Without those men, the world would not be as it is today. Sometimes during all this traveling, I ask myself, am I awake? Or is this just a horrifying dream? Like now, for instance, is this a dream? Or is it real? Is this me, walking with my trolley on a deserted road in Spitzbergen? I can't imagine. They warn me every morning. Redmond, be careful outside. There are polar bears everywhere. Just never leave the house without a guy with a gun.
I seen a polar bear lift up a snowmobile, and that's 300 kilos with one arm.
We had an accident last year, and the polar bear went straight into the tent, grabbed him, and dragged him out on the tent.
Here I got actually two different kind of bullets. This is a very fast bullet, and this is a very heavy bullet.
Polar bear always attack on the head.
On the head.
On the head.
Do you see a man with a gun here? I don't. All I see is a fat Englishman waiting to be swallowed by a polar bear. So yes, this must be a dream. This can't be real. And it all has to do with that confusing midsummer night. It never gets dark here. When is a man supposed to sleep? One way or another, here at Spitzbergen, I am constantly wide awake at the moments I should be sleeping. Like here, for instance, waiting for breakfast at 3 at night. At the same time, I can't keep my eyes open when I should be wide awake. But to be honest, for this episode, it really doesn't matter. Even without the midsummer day and night confusion, you will ask yourself, is this real? Did this really happen? Or is it pure fantasy? Let's begin where it all started, La France. There, in 1783, two brothers invented the hot air balloon.
And imagine the impact that had. It would be exactly like the first men on the moon, the first men into space, the first Sputnik, whatever. It was extraordinary. For the first time ever, mankind had left the surface of the Earth and entered the third dimension.
Suddenly, the sky was the limit. Some wanted to discover Africa with a balloon. Others tried to fly to the moon, only to make a genuine discovery that there was no oxygen up there. So they went ahead and died. They wouldn't be the only victims. The 19th century balloon mania would cost many more adventurers their life. And that's exactly what happened with my hero of this episode. In 1897, the Swede Salomon August Andrée and two companions left for the northern part of Spitzbergen. They had a crazy and daring plan to be the first men to cross the North Pole in a balloon. On the 11th of July, they took off from an icy tip of Spitzbergen. Slowly, the balloon floated to the horizon. Then it disappeared, and nobody ever saw them again. 33 years later, newspapers reported a sensational discovery. Seal hunters had found their frozen bodies on the ice. Scattered around them were the remains of the expedition equipment and, believe it or not, the diaries of the men and their still undeveloped photographs. That made it possible to reconstruct the voyage day after day until they died, 3 months after they took off.
Well, firstly, it's wonderful to have a book that actually has come back from the dead in one's hands. That's magical. That this was gone for 30 years. These special diaries of this lunatic in his balloon, found 30 years later. And this was wrapped up in seal grass in a packet and then in a sweater, clutched to Andrée's chest.
So it became a bestseller in the 30s then, of course.
Yes, yes, and he became a great hero in the 30s.
So in a way, he was lucky, Andrée. By being found dead and frozen after all these years, he made himself immortal. From now on, he and his companions weren't just explorers, they became Swedish heroes.
Well, here we are in Balloon Town, Andrée's birthplace, and a whole industry has grown up around him here. He's a national hero. This is rather good. And all the images are on the epic scale, heroic stuff. Engineer and aeronaut. And then just, yeah, there we are. This bust of him here. Now, you can see that's put there to be admired, this man. Well, in a way I admire him, and sure he's a national hero, but why he really, really interests me is because he was a spectacular failure.
Today, Andrée has his own museum here in Grenzen. Director Joriksen can talk for hours about his and my heroes.
Confronting a copy of the gondola, equipment and other items.
Wow. This, for instance, is a replica of the balloon, and this, a replica of Andrée.
I'd love to know all about these characters,
yes.
who they are.
There are pictures of him and his companions everywhere.
Let's begin with Salomon August Andrée over there. He was the proper guy for this huge expedition.
And why have you put this beautiful woman here beside him?
We placed Gurley beside him because Gurley is very important. Gurley and Andrée had a secret love affair. She was married with 3 daughters. And she's very important to understand the first books, the story about Andrée, because she wrote the first books.
Wow.
She constructed the biography of Andrée.
So we look on him through her eyes.
Yes, in many ways, yes.
Full of love, so he's a very lucky man.
He's a lucky man, yeah. Here we have Nils Strindberg. He was the photographer, the navigator of this expedition.
Yeah.
And here we have a true heartbreaking story, because here we have also Anna Schalje,
Oh.
his fiancée. They engaged in autumn 1896.
Oh, wow.
And when Andrée heard about this, he told Nils, now you are free to quit this expedition. But Nils said, no, I will fulfill my promise or my mission. I will join you up to the Arctic. The third member was Knut Freankel. So we had Andrée, Strindberg and Freankel. They took off.
Right.
Now let's take a look at the map. How all this turned out. Here we have to imagine the North Pole region, and high up there by the peppermint stick on the top, there's the North Pole.
Oh, right.
We put the peppermint stick there. It's quite characteristic.
There's a barber shop up there.
Yeah. Here's Svalbard, or Spitzbergen, which we say sometimes, and Dane Island, here. This is the place for departure, 11th July 1897.
And that's why we boarded this plane to Spitzbergen. From there, we would take a little boat to the place from which Andrée's expedition left.
Spitzbergen by night. It's 1:30 in the morning.
What a strange landscape this is. It's beautiful, but at the same time, cold and hostile. My driver tells me about the rules here. There are around 2,500 people and 3,000 polar bears living here. Of these 2 groups, the latter are protected. That means you're only allowed to kill a polar bear when you are really convinced he is planning to eat you. I think I better start preparing for all this.
Well, it's remarkable, and then there are shops.
Yeah, this is the city center.
Yeah, city centre here.
Yeah.
Hi, Reverend O'Hanlon.
Yeah, morning.
Great. And you know about Andrée, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah? Oh, great. Yeah, I can see you're sort of man who would. Now, imagine that I am going to the North Pole in a balloon.
In a balloon?
What would I need? Let's start with shoes and work up.
Then you have to follow me.
Times have changed a lot since Andrée and his men were here.
So it's much better quality?
I'm not having pink.
Oh, yeah, why not?
No.
So people can see you.
Andrée and his companions were dressed according to the latest fashion, with lots of wool that dried very slowly when you were unfortunate enough to fall into the icy water.
Because one of the men with him, young Strindberg, he actually fell into a lead when they left the balloon, when they crashed, and was terrible trouble. They had to dry him out and rub him.
You have to take all the clothes off, make a fire, make him dry, take a new dry clothes, and you have to do it really fast.
Really? Otherwise, hypothermia.
Otherwise, hypothermia, your toes, fingertips going first.
So you lose your fingers?
Yeah, use your fingers, and you have to cut it off. If you don't cut it off, it's still growing.
Oh,
So it's still coming. You can lose your arm.
I think
you
I'd
can lose
rather
more.
be eaten by a polar bear. That would be classy.
Nope.
No? No. Oh, right. Yes. Of course, that's not a joke to you living here.
Wrong joke, obviously.
It's not
Another
at all.
burning question then.
But I
Is
seem
it
to
true
remember
that the
there are
best thing to do,
steps
if
you
you
have to
run
take
into a
when
polar
you see
bear,
might be in
is to strip naked
jacket
as quick as possible?
Is that?
Don't do that.
Don't do that.
For the winter time, you're going to freeze to death
What?
if you take
No.
your jacket off.
Yeah.
Now, if you see in front of you, like 50 meters or something, and he can attack you, like one, he's up in 60 kilometers an hour.
60.
Yeah, then you are done in a way.
Oh, I've been saying
But
30.
he's not going to do that 100 yards away.
Wow.
It's too far. He's too lazy.
God, I obviously know nothing about polar bears. I would easily have undressed for the animal, thinking that that would keep him from eating me. Let me introduce you to Jonathan, our modest sailing ship that will take us to the place where my heroes, Andrée and his men, after weeks of waiting for the right wind, finally decided to take off.
It was from a place exactly like this that Andrée and Strindberg and Freankel they took off from. But you have to imagine that a balloon house are just a big hut built around a balloon. Well, finally, in July 1897, they've got to go. They have to move. Now, there is a moment's solemn silence. All three of us stand there on the top of the car, meaning on the top of the gondola and the balloon, and then the right moment comes. Cut away everywhere, comes Andrée's voice. 3 knives cut the 3 lines holding fast the carrying ring, and the balloon rises amid the hurrahs of those below. We answer with a hurrah for old Sweden! And then we rose from out the balloon house. A peculiar sensation, wonderful, indescribable. But one has no time for much thought. I photograph for a while, and then we see that we are descending. Ballast is thrown out, but we dip into the sea a moment.
From the beginning, things went wrong. Not only did they lose their steering ropes, the balloon was leaking gas, despite countless repairs. To me, it seems like certain suicide. I think it's time to consult a specialist here.
Welcome to Stockholm.
Redmond O'Hanlon, and
Going to Solingen.
you're the great expert on ballooning at this period, aren't you?
Well, especially Andrée, interesting character.
Gunther is an aviation expert. He wrote a book on Andrée's flight and the many mistakes that were made. He's amazed, for instance, that they took off with hardly any flight experience.
Andrée wanted to fly with this balloon, almost 4,000 kilometers in a straight line. The balloon was to hold gas for almost 6 days, and all this had not been achieved before. I mean, at that time, the record was 24 hours in the air, not 6 days.
24
Yeah, only 24 hours, because balloons lose gas very rapidly, hydrogen balloons.
But this steering technique with ropes and sails,
Yeah.
I find it quite hard to visualize how it works.
I can try to show you if you.
That'd be.
See, my drawing is not the best, so I'm not an artist. So you have the ropes down here that are collected in a ring, and from the ring then you have other ropes here that keep up the gondola of the boat. Then you have here the ground, and the idea was now to steer this balloon in a certain direction. Is you have ropes, 3 in this case, heavy ropes made of hemp. They extend downwards, and then run along the ice or the ground or whatever you go over. And by having those 3 ropes on the ground, you had all of a sudden a fixed point on ground. Having a fixed point here, you could have then sails up here, like in a sailboat. There's sails here, and then you could try to steer the balloon in a certain geographical direction. So on paper this seems a straightforward affair. In practice this has been tried on numerous occasions during the 18th century by other aeronauts. It did not really work. And he thought it does work, and we had to be shown that it works in the Arctic region. It shows he was very optimistic, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, here, this is Strindberg. It's impossible not to like Strindberg. He writes very vividly. Andrée is writing for an audience, and you get the suspicion now and then that but for this great ambition, this driving force, this obsession, he was rather a boring man. But not Strindberg. Up in the carrying ring, which is the ring through which all the ropes go, above the gondola, up in the carrying ring, it is confoundedly pleasant. One feels so safe there and so at home. One knows that the bumps up there are felt less, and this allows one to sit calmly and write without having to hold on.
That first day, everything goes smoothly. A strong wind takes the balloon quickly to the north. But on the second day, there is hardly any wind, and they linger at the same latitude. On the third day, the balloon starts to fly lower and lower.
The balloon is beginning to descend because they've got into the high Arctic, north of here, and there's been drizzle, there's been a fine mist, and this has frozen on the balloon bag and forced it down, really much heavier now. And terrible sequence begins of the gondola, the car, whatever you like to call it, the basket, hitting the ice. And then at the end, when they can't stand any more of it, it's really violent bumping against the ice. Every 5 minutes there's a bang and everything shakes and the balloon is coming to bits. And Andrée decides after 3 days to stop it. And he opens the valve and out comes the rest of the hydrogen gas. And they settle. It's a controlled landing. They settle on the ice and the balloon gradually deflates.
The rolls of film discovered in 1930 show the three men posing for Strindberg's camera. They didn't seem to worry at all. They carried 1,500 kilos of food and equipment in their balloon. That should be more than enough for an easy return to the civilized world. But as they finally start walking, after a week, it soon turns out to be more difficult than they thought. For more than 70 days, they drudge over the ice, and what should have been an easy trip soon becomes a hellish experience. Strindberg pictures keep coming back to me at night when I finally succeed in falling asleep, ignoring the midnight sun. Suddenly, it's me drudging on the ice. It's me feeling the burning muscle pain after pulling the sledges for hours. That biting cold, the icy water, and the feet frozen in your boots. It's me struggling to climb those mountains of ice, paralyzed by the fear that I will never see my loved ones again. That afternoon at the ferry, I had met Tyrone Martinson. He wrote a book based on Strindberg's photographs and letters to his fiancée, Anna.
Ja, min älskade. Nu vet din Nils verkligen vad det vill säga att gå på polaris. I starten hade vi ett litet missöde. Då vi skulle över från vårt isflak med vår första kälke körde den på sned och kom i. Det var med svårighet vi lyckades få klara den. Jag blev ner till knäna och höll i kälken så att den inte skulle sjunka. Utan plötsligen lyckades vi få upp kälken. Men min säck som låg på kälken är nog våt inuti. Och där som jag har alla dina brev och porträtt. Ja, det blev min dyrbaraste skatt i vinter.
Tyrone worked for more than 3 years with the original films of Strindberg, trying to reconstruct the walk back over the ice.
I'm really amazed with how long they lasted. I mean, these 3 guys from Sweden they were not outdoors people. They became hunters on the ice. They were not hunters before, but they managed to shoot and take care of the animals they shot, and they did very well. Here they have shot their first polar bear. It's at the landing site, and Andrée shot it. And here, Strindberg is actually out here, and then Freankel posing with that bear. Psychologically, it must have been really horrible. Every night you get your little tent up, and the 3 of them in the same sleeping bag.
My dearest Anna, we have just stopped for the day after drudging and pulling the sledges for hours. Let me first congratulate you, because today is your birthday. Oh, how I wish I could tell you that I am in excellent health and that you do not need to fear for us. It's strange to think that not even for your next birthday it would be possible for us to be at home, that perhaps we have to winter here for another year. Poor little Anna. In what despair you will be if we should not come home next autumn. You must know that I am tortured by the idea of it too. Not for my own sake, for I do not mind to suffer hardships as long as I will come home at last.
And why on earth did they leave with a balloon which was leaking quite a lot of gas?
I think it was because they didn't really have a choice. Andrée had sort of got himself into a corner where he had also, it was also about being the celebrity, the famous man who had come up with this plan, and many people had invested in it. The king had invested in it, and Alfred Nobel and Oscar Dixon. They were all very prominent people in Sweden, and Andrée had to he had to sort of deliver. And I think in the end it was also about the nation. It was the pride, and I think the pride actually overtook reason. Yeah. He just couldn't be that living donkey. He had to be the dead lion, in many ways.
I think probably Andrée already knew this was going to be a disaster, and he writes in his diary very early on, when his 2 companions are sleeping in the lower deck of the gondola. He says, "It is not a little strange to be floating here above the polar sea, to be the first that have floated here in a balloon. How soon, I wonder, shall we have successors? Shall we be thought mad, or will our example be followed? I cannot deny but that all 3 of us are dominated by a feeling of pride. We think we can well face death, having done what we have done. Is not the whole, perhaps, the expression of an extremely strong sense of individuality, which cannot bear the thought of living and dying like a man in the ranks, forgotten by coming generations? Is this ambition? Well, yes, Andrée, of course it is. And I'm sure that was a very large component
in your reason for doing what you were doing.
This was the first day,
This is the second day.
second day already.
Yeah, second day, I think.
That he takes into account that it might go wrong.
Absolutely, and that they're facing death. We can well face death. Well, and the silence that Andrée and Strindberg talk about, and how good it is to have companions, because you cannot avoid feeling depressed by this silence, feeling you're in an inhuman world. I still don't know what to think of Spitzbergen. It seems it's a country not fit for our kind. Most inhabitants come here for fast and easy money. They don't stay long. There are no children born here. If a woman is due, she has to give birth in Norway. You hardly find any people older than 60. You're not allowed to die here. At least, you can't get buried on the island today, since the frozen earth pushes the corpses back up again. So no, this is not a place made for human beings. Not for Andrée and his men trying to walk back over the ice, nor for other pioneers who came to try their luck here. Nobody wants to stay in Spitzbergen. One day or another, you leave the place. That's exactly what happened to Pyramiden, a deserted Russian mining town where we anchored to spend the night.
Oh, I think it says 31st of May, 1998.
Yeah, that's right.
We left this cursed place and have not regretted it for a second since.
Yeah, I don't think it says that.
But what a massive, well, it's a big town set up just for a mine.
The Russians came here in 1927. They left the place when the mine was empty, in 1998. After that, the kittiwakes took over. What happened to those miners who lived here? Where are they now? Where are their families? Do they miss the place? It seems as if they were so glad they could finally leave Spitzbergen that they left everything behind.
I always love to be on stage. Oh, wow. 1,000 or less kilometers from the pole. And here is Horowitz. Prokofiev. Oh, God, things that must have happened here.
The Russians always had settlements here. The reason was simple. Both Norway and Russia wanted to claim the North Pole, and so did Sweden. Andrée carried a Swedish flag with him. The idea was to drop it above the pole, claiming the place for Sweden. There is one man who never wants to leave the island, Birger Amundsen. He knows Spitzbergen intimately, so he can imagine what it was like for Andrée and his men to have to walk back over the ice.
The Swedes are never getting finished with this Andrée expedition, and the best always is when the hero die.
Yeah. Yes.
So then it's all this, you have this imagination and what went wrong and all these things. But if you read about the Andrée expedition, it was a bad planned expedition from the very beginning.
Travelling over the ice, Andrée had no idea what to expect. While they tried to reach Franz Josef Land in the east, the ice was drifting to the west, taking them in the opposite direction. At the end, they accidentally set foot here, on the notorious Kitoya, also known as White Island.
When you end up in ice in this area and start to walk there, you know, they didn't want to go ashore at Kvitøya. And if you have seen Kvitøya and been on Kvitøya, you can understand that. You know, it's not the place to be.
What's it like?
It's, you know, it's just ice. It's 98% or 95% ice, with 2 small places where there's land popping out. And I guess when you are there and realize that you have to spend the winter there, you have to have a very strong state of mind to and even if you have it in the beginning, staying there for such a long time, you know, that's really, really hard.
Well, one thing they did was to start to build an ice hut, and they started to work on that. Strindberg was the designer, and there's even in the book that came in the 30s, you can see a little drawing on what it looked like. That was about finished when they reached White Island. But they were really unlucky, because the ice floe that it was built on cracked when it was pressed up against White Island. Otherwise, the situation might have been different. They might have actually been having a winter quarter. But somewhere around that time, you can clearly see that they are starting to be worried. The big diary that Andrée had, that ends when they reach White Island. And then he starts a new one, which is called sometimes the smaller diary. That one ends like a poem. It's destroyed, so half of it is actually destroyed. You can only see the outer parts of all the pages. And we don't exactly know when that ends, but it is in the beginning of October, so it didn't last very long. So it's kind of an open ending in a way. The only thing we know for sure is that the young photographer Nils Strindberg was the one that died first, because he was buried when they were found.
You know what's happening when you are freezing? Slowly but gradually you are sinking down. And what I don't know how to say it in English, you know, når du mister motet, it means that you lose the spirit, you know.
Yes, despair.
You don't believe in this anymore, you know.
And then
you give
die.
up.
They were found where the tent was. Both of them, Freankel and Andrée, lying side by side, but out of the sleeping bag.
Yeah.
And isn't it true that in the last stages of hypothermia, when you're freezing to death, suddenly you feel really hot and you chuck your clothes off?
Yes. Because when your temperature is falling, you are confused and you're not thinking clear. You know, you do strange things and you feel very warm.
You feel very hot, yes.
Yeah.
So that would make sense
So
of getting
it's-
out of the bag.
So in that sense, it was a miracle that they lived on for 3 months. or
Yeah,
something
that's a miracle, really.
This shows a little bit of what it looked like when they were found. And it's hard to tell who's who here, actually.
Were the bodies still intact when they were found?
Well, it's different descriptions of that. I think that one of the bodies that were most intact was Freankel.
So they hadn't been eaten by a polar bear?
Well, the polar bears had been there, so they had been around. And we can see here as well that the body is in pieces. But you could sort of assemble. There was a body there, but some of it was scattered. So polar bears had been there, but they found them in a way so that they can actually determine their position. Andrée was sitting where the tent had been, inside the tent. Freankel was actually laying down and taking his shoes off, and then Strindberg was buried.
In 1930, the bodies of the three men were brought back to Stockholm. Thousands of people lined the streets. With the discovery of the men on the ice, Sweden had obtained 3 heroes in one go. Seeing the huge ceremony in Stockholm, I can't help thinking what Andrée would have thought of it, had he been able to watch it.
He would be very satisfied, I think. He would be pleased. And he knows that having done this, he will not die like a man in the ranks. He will actually become somebody. He will become at least a note in history. And he would be very pleased. We're sitting here today, and lots of things have been done. I mean, books, films, everything that he wished. So in that sense, I think, but maybe he's sitting there somewhere in his heaven and feeling sort of a pleasure in that, but also I guess he needs to come to terms with taking 2 people with him towards his death. Usually sometimes you think that the story ends sort of when they were found at White Island, but for me the story always ends in Stockholm. Years later, Anna died, if I remember correct now, I think it's 1949 when she died. She spent years and years with the Strindberg family when Strindberg were lost in the Arctic.
She was probably hoping for a while that he might come back by a miracle.
Oh, she was. Definitely. She couldn't. And Strindberg's father, Oscar, tried to sort of convince her and encourage her to move on. And eventually she did. She met a man, a British guy, called Hawtrey. I mean, he's really a hero, I think, in this story, because he knew that Anna's heart was truly with somebody else. It was with Strindberg. And they've made this arrangement that the heart, being the symbol of love, should be taken out of her body when she died, and it should be buried alongside Strindberg in Stockholm. So he arranged for that, and on the 4th of September 1949, there was a small ceremony in Stockholm where in a little silver box, the remains of her heart were put down beside Strindberg.
So what do you think? Dream or reality? It's a pity nothing is left. No pictures of the ceremony with the heart. None of the compassionate husband who buried it, here next to the remains of Strindberg. So there is only one thing you can do. Lie down here, close your eyes, and listen. And if you listen carefully, you can hear it. You can hear Anna's heart. It would take 113 years before somebody would really cross the North Pole in a balloon.
Well, we're going to meet a real explorer at last. This man walked alone to the North Pole, and more to our purposes, I suppose, he succeeded where Andrée failed. He actually crossed the North Pole in a hot air balloon and landed in Siberia. No, you tell me, if you have to be as insane as you are and Andrée is to achieve such great feats in the Arctic, I mean, you have to be obsessional, don't you?
Yes, you have to. And I say I'm not enough brave to do what Andrée intended to do it more than 1 century ago. I mean,
But you did it. Incredible bravery.
yeah, I did it with the very good balloon, you know.
Well, his was the best of its time.
Yes, that is important. Every explorer take the best equipment when he starts. Even 2 or 3 centuries ago, always they have the best.
Yeah.
But even the best with the hydrogen in the balloon, I mean, was leaking probably, and it was too heavy. And
But then your basket looked smaller than his, than Andrée's. You looked.
well, my basket was the 4-star basket. Yes.
Yes.
It was very very warm.
Yeah.
Have 6 windows around.
Huh.
Just I could see on top and then hug down.
Yeah.
Yes, it was very very comfortable. Yeah.
The biggest difference with Andrée's journey was the support from the ground. The modern balloonist is instructed by a weatherman who can tell him exactly what to expect and at what height to fly.
Did Andrée know about the stratosphere? Weren't you way up into the stratosphere with your balloon?
No, Andrée didn't know anything.
Okay.
I mean, just they said, I will go with the wind.
Yes.
But now we know better about the different layer of air. I mean, for example, here we are.
Yeah.
The wind is coming from here, so
Yeah.
we will go
That
that
way.
way. If you go a little bit higher, maybe there is another layer, another direction. So now we work with the weatherman, and they tell you exactly, go to 300 meters, go to 2,000 meters. It's the guy on land who know exactly where the good wind is. That's quite
that's
different. Yeah.
Very clever. But you put in a year
It was
of
much-
learning how to fly, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah.
He didn't have that choice, but he should have known a little bit more about ballooning.
Yeah, but if he knows more about ballooning, I think
He'd never do it.
no,
Ah,
he never tried.
yes. I think that's the main attraction of the story, isn't it? That he didn't know he was incredibly brave and he died.
Oh yeah,
No.
yeah. Well, he didn't ride on balloon. I mean,
No.
he died because there is nobody for rescue. Now you can call and somebody come to rescue you. I mean, this is much more safe. And what Andrée did, I mean, is incredible. You can see absolutely nothing, just ice in front of you. You don't know where to go, how far it is, the other side. I mean, that's
Yes.
incredible. I admire what he did.
You do?
Oh, yes, yeah.